What's up, guys? Welcome to a very special live edition bonus episode of Wrestling is Life is Wrestling with me, Cody Diener. I am Cody Diener, and I am a professional wrestler. I'm a professional wrestling producer with Impact Wrestling, soon to be TNA Wrestling in January again. I am also a professional motivational speaker traveling all across North America, going into schools and businesses and sharing my journey and the lessons I've learned along the way with young people. I am also a father of 4 wonderful children and a husband to 1 beautiful wife, and I am a podcaster. This is my very first live podcast that I have ever done. It's called Ask Cody Anything. We are streaming right now live on YouTube over at youtube.com at Cody Diener Podcast, over on facebook.com/Cody Diener, and also on Twitter, aka X, also at Cody Diener. Thank you guys for being here. If you are here right now and you are an avid listener of my podcast, Wrestling is Life is Wrestling, just say hey. Say hey in the chat. I can see your comments. Whether you're on YouTube right now, you just need to have a YouTube profile. And if you do, I can see it. On Facebook, you just need to obviously also have a profile. I can see it, and I can see you guys. Okay. I see some people starting to come on here. Rated R Lewis, no, the wrestling story. We have to get this man to 1K. You are right. I just kind of, once I started the podcast there, Rated R Lewis, I started to kind of really start to use my YouTube more. And I haven't really used it other than to just put up a couple promotional videos here and there. And now I'm starting to use it because I know some people like to watch my podcasts rather than listen to it. I'm curious for those of that are watching this right now, if you want to participate in this interactive experience, let me know if you watch the episodes on YouTube or if you listen to them. And if you do listen to them, what streaming service do you use? And if you watch it on YouTube, let me know, because I'm curious to hear from you guys on whether or not you like to watch them or listen to them. But yes, Rated R Lewis has said we got to get me up to 1,000. I haven't been pushing my YouTube at all in the last number of years, but I am now, and I'm putting up every single episode up on my YouTube. So yes, if we can get those numbers up, get me more subscribers, get me some more watching hours, I can start to monetize my YouTube and do all the things that I want to be able to do in terms of trying to make some money doing this thing that we call podcasting. I'm going to start. I see people are already jumping in the chat, putting in their questions. This is awesome. I'm going to try to keep up. I'm not going to be able to keep up with all of them. I'm not going to be able to get to all the questions here in this episode. But I am promising that I will get to the questions that were sent in from my patrons over at patreon.com/Cody Diener. I'm going to put my own comment in here right now and direct you guys over to patreon.com/Cody Diener. If you haven't checked that out, please do. Over my Patreon, every single episode comes early and ad free, as well as no intro, no outro, no commercials, even though I know some people love the commercials, especially the ones that I do with my kids. They all come at you early, ad free, commercial free, as well as bonus stories. Every single one that I've done is up there. The archives are in there, the full episodes, both video and audio. So I don't just put the audio up there, I also put up the video. So if that's of interest to you, please go check out my Patreon over at patreon.com/Cody Diener. So one thing I have done for my patrons, because of their support, I've agreed to make sure that I get to their questions first. So I'm going to get to my patrons' questions and try to answer them the best that I can. And then I will get to some of the questions that are in the chat right now. I appreciate you guys tuning in. And I've made a note of a bunch that I've got on my social media over at Cody Diener, and like I said, I'm gonna get to as many as I can. I got some really good questions here from my patrons. Um, I'm gonna start with one that just came in today. I'm gonna put them here in the chat. Put this question so you guys can see it too. So this first question is from MGB Graham. He's one of my patrons over at patreon.com/Cody Diener. And his question was this: which person from the wrestling world who has passed away would you have liked to have appeared most on the podcast, and why? This is a really good question. Not one that I've ever thought of until MGB Graham over on my Patreon asked it. And I saw this question earlier today, and I've been thinking about it all day. And when it comes to questions like this, if you think about it too much, then there's too many answers. And there's a lot of guys that I could say, fill in the blank, with so many different amazing wrestlers that have influenced me over the years. But I got to go with the first guy that came to mind for me. And that was a guy that I hated when I was a kid, but is now one of my favorite wrestlers to go back and study his stuff. And that is the one and the only Rowdy Roddy Piper. I hated him as a kid. I despised him. I was a Hulkamaniac. I did not like Roddy Piper at all. There was nothing likable about him to a 5-year-old. As I grew in my knowledge of wrestling, I became a teenager. I started watching it with a different eye and realizing, wait a minute, people don't like the good guys as much unless there is a good villain to be the antagonist to this protagonist in this story. And that's when I started to watch wrestling different, and I started to appreciate guys like a Rowdy Roddy Piper that much more. He's one of my go-to guys that I go back and study now. I have three guys that for whatever reason, they're the guys that I go back and I study their stuff, and I just watch them all the time. Rowdy Roddy Piper is one of those guys. Number 2 is Terry Funk, and number 3 is Jake the Snake Roberts. In no particular order with those guys. Those are just my top 3. And I say Rowdy Roddy Piper not just because I'm a fan of his work, but I have read Rowdy Roddy Piper's book. I have listened to Rowdy Roddy Piper interviews, podcasts that he did before he passed. I listened to his podcast. I listened to as many stories as I can that Rowdy Piper tells, because I feel like his storytelling is top notch, both in the ring doing a promo, but then also when he does podcasts and interviews. And Rowdy Piper has an amazing life. He led such a full life. And when he does these interviews, he goes into depth about the struggles that he had as a young kid. He was very open about that near the end of his career. Almost every interview I listened to of Rowdy Piper, he talked about his tumultuous childhood and the things that he had to overcome. And it's really, really wild and inspiring what he was able to do. He was homeless as a teenager, and he says that professional wrestling saved his life. So I cannot think of a better guest for a podcast called Wrestling is Life is Wrestling, where we talk about how wrestling and life mash together and how you can learn about life through wrestling and you can learn about wrestling through life. There's no better person that I could have as a guest on a show about that than the one and the only Rowdy Roddy Piper. And fun little tidbit. Some people think this is fun. Some people go, I don't care about this, but I do. I have almost bought Roots of Fight clothing many times. Roots of Fight, if you're not familiar, they have some really cool sweaters and jogging pants and all this sweatpants and stuff. They have some really fascinating guys that they make merch for, and they just released their second release of Rowdy Piper sweater and sweatpants. I missed the first release because they sold out so fast. They've just re-released it over on Roots of Fight, and I bought my very first Roots of Fight swag. So I got a Rowdy Piper sweatpants and sweater coming from Roots of Fight. Should be it's in the mail right now, on its way. I'll be wearing that real soon. Which is a very good segue into me talking about some even cooler swag than Roots of Fight. That is Rest When Dead. You can see this signature Cody Deaner's t-shirt behind me. This other one, this is one of the best-selling shirts on restwhendead.ca, the Reaper, and also my new signature hats that are going to be available now at merchandise stand near you. They're also available online at restwhendead.ca. Those of you who've been listening to the podcast, I haven't said this on the podcast yet. You're going to get this right now because I'm not going to really be talking about this in depth until this week, but I've announced it on my social media. If you haven't heard it, I'll tell you right now. I am now the vice president of Rest When Dead Clothing, the vice president of the fitness or the Reaper Fitness Group. Dude, I did not expect when I started a podcast that within a couple months, I would not only have an amazing sponsor like Rest When Dead Clothing, but I would be the vice president of that company. It's happened. So without doing a whole commercial right now of Rest When Dead, you hear enough of those on the podcast. I just want to give a shout out to the Reaper crew, Crazy Steve, Jody Threat, who are also sponsored athletes with Rest When Dead Clothing. And I got some really cool things coming down the pipe as the new VP of Rest When Dead. I'm going to give back to the wrestling community. This is one thing that Aaron York and the folks at Rest When Dead want to do is they want to give back to the communities that they go into. So they started just in the fitness community and now they've expanded into the wrestling community and they want to give back to the communities that they work with. So we're going to have some really cool things that I'm going to be doing for some independent wrestlers, for guys that are struggling right now and are struggling through this journey of professional wrestling. I feel you. I know that struggle. We talk about it all the time on this podcast. We're going to be doing some cool stuff for you guys through Rest When Dead Clothing. So shout out to Rest When Dead and shout out to anybody on here that has bought any of the merch. If you've supported Rest When Dead through this podcast, please let me know in the chat so I can give you a very special shout out. I'm going to make sure that I get to your question as well, by the way. So if you put a question in the chat, I will get to it if you have bought a Rest When Dead merchandise in the past. So that's question number one from a patron of mine, MGB Graham. Let's get to a second question here. This is from Thomas Ray over at patreon.com/Cody Diener. Thomas Ray, my patron there, has this question. What is the most insightful and meaningful experience you've had, whether it was in the ring, public speaking, or an interview that you've had? Wow. Thomas Ray going right to the heart with this one. What's the most insightful or a meaningful experience you've had, whether it was in the ring, public speaking, or an interview that you've had? I can't narrow this down to one. Here's the thing. The most meaningful experiences that I have had in the ring are not related to my success in the ring, whether that's a championship belt that I have won or somebody that I've wanted to wrestle with, my whole life. It's usually not related to that. It's two things pop into mind. First, I'm going to tell you a very specific wrestling story, and then I'll tell you kind of really in terms of insightful experiences the next part. But two things really come to mind. Number one, when I was a kid, one of my heroes growing up in the wrestling business was a man that you wrestling fans are probably familiar with, and that is Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. I loved Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. He was an innovator. He was an influencer. If you ask 10 wrestlers who their favorite wrestler is, 9 out of 10, they're going to have Ricky the Dragon Steamboat on their list of some of their favorite wrestlers. He was one of mine. He's my top 3 when I was a kid. And a number of years ago, after going through a lot of ups and downs in the business, I got to perform for an entire weekend with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat in my corner as my special manager. These were for shows for a wonderful Ontario independent wrestling company called Rock Solid Wrestling. So for a weekend, I had Ricky the Dragon Steamboat in my corner as my manager. Unbelievable, right? My childhood hero is in the ring with me after I've successfully defended my Canadian Heavyweight Championship belt, and my hero, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, is raising my hand in victory. If that's not meaningful, I don't know what is. But what was even more meaningful than that is what happened after, because everybody in the audience got to see my hero raise my hand in victory, cheer me on from ringside. That was amazing. But what you fans didn't see is what happened in the locker room after. After a weekend of having my hero in my corner cheering for me, I go back to the locker room. I'm taking off my boots. I'm sweating, kind of digesting the fact that my hero was just in my corner for this weekend. It was amazing. And Ricky the Dragon Steamboat comes up to me as I'm taking off my boots. He says, "Cody, I got to tell you something." And I stand up. I'm like, "Yes, sir." And he sticks out his hand and he says, "I just wanted to tell you, Cody, you are an awesome wrestler." And I was speechless. I I couldn't believe it. My hero, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, just told me that I'm awesome. And I don't think that Ricky the Dragon Steamboat realized kind of what I was going through at that time. But like many wrestlers, people that are struggling on the indies or trying to move up the ladder in the wrestling business, we have, ups and downs in terms of our confidence, in terms of our self-esteem. And I was going through a time when, I was being told by a lot of people online, uh, some other people just in the business in general, that I wasn't awesome. And my confidence wasn't at an extremely high point. I wouldn't say it was in the gutter, but I would say it wasn't super high. And for my hero, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, to look me in the eye, shake my hand after working with me, and tell me that I am an awesome wrestler meant the world to me. So one thing, I think this is a very meaningful experience because this is a story that I'll share sometimes with young people when I'm traveling around at schools and talking to young kids who are dealing with self-esteem issues themselves or mental health issues or bullying, and they're being told really mean things, much more mean than just "you're not awesome." And I know because I look at these kids' faces, and I know that there's kids that are dealing with some really tough things in terms of bullying. And I tell these kids, "Look, I've been told some really mean, nasty things. Uh, I just got to go to some of my YouTube videos of some of the stuff I've done in the past and read the comments, and it's nasty. The comments that you guys are leaving me, no, they're not nasty. They're great because you guys are my fans. But I've read some pretty nasty things about me online, and I just tell these kids, look, you can either focus on the negative or you can focus on the positive. And for me, every time I read a nasty thing or hear a nasty thing or somebody has something negative to say about me, I go, okay, you might say that I suck, but Ricky the Dragon Steamboat says that I'm awesome. And I'm going to listen to my hero, not to you. So I think it's really important and meaningful to me that I had this experience that I can now look back on, and it still affects me to this day, that if I ever have confidence issues, I can remember that my childhood hero, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, said that I'm awesome, and I don't have to worry about the negativity that other people might be throwing at me. That's one of the first things that comes to mind. And then, and the insightful thing isn't a big, moment like this. that I can really draw on. It's more kind of subtle, and that is it's happened to me many times in the ring when I'm wrestling that I will, and this happens to me when I'm speaking as well, because it says whether it was in the ring or public speaking. It's when I look out at the audience and I see smiles on children's faces. That might seem like a really cheesy answer, um, but it's meaningful and insightful to me because it's insightful because I look inside myself and remember this is why I do what I do. This is why I do this, is to put smiles on kids' faces. And the fact that I'm able to reach kids both in the ring as a professional wrestler and then also reach kids in a meaningful way when I'm going into schools and doing my speeches, that means the world to me. So, and then I can share stories with them, just like I've just shared about Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. So, Thomas Ray, that's really the most meaningful experiences I've had, are just really just moments where I look out at the audience and see kids smiling. And that's whether I'm doing a Impact Wrestling pay-per-view that is seen all around the world, or on a little fair show, where there's only 50 people that have come to a county fair and decide to take in the wrestling for the day. It's honestly just as meaningful to me because these people are wrestling fans and they're smiling and their day is better because of this wonderful thing we call professional wrestling. That might sound cheesy. That even might sound like hyperbole and that I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. It's why I do what I do. So Thomas Ray, thank you for that awesome question. I appreciate it. All right. Let's go to another question from one of my patrons, and then this will be the last kind of set of questions. I want to get to one of my patrons who's at the highest level. He is a Diener Maniac Megamark. I want to give him a huge shout out, and I'm going to pull his question up right now. I'm going to put it in the comments so we can visually see what it is. He's got 3. I'm going to hit all 3 of them. This is from one of my loyal patrons, Doug Timmermans. He's got 3 questions. Doug has this to say. Who, in your opinion, is the one person who you think should have been a bigger star or gotten further in the business than they did, but it just didn't happen? Oh, man, that is a really good question. Who should have been a bigger star or gotten further in the business than they did, but it just didn't happen? I'm going to kind of tweak your question, Doug, even though it's a good one. I'm going to tweak it to kind of put it in the present. And I'm going to say who, in my opinion, is someone right now who should be a big star and deserves to get far in the business, but it's just not happening right now. I want to focus in on that. And really, I can name a lot of people, but I want to use this question to kind of put some people over. And these are some guys that I wrestle with regularly that I think deserve a lot more recognition. One of those guys is Tyler Turva. Any Ontario independent wrestling fans that are familiar with the scene here in Ontario, Canada, you will be very familiar with Tyler Turva. One question I get asked a lot is who's my favorite opponent? And there's too many people to name, but I usually answer it with, well, in the last 5 years, my number one favorite opponent in the ring is Tyler Turva. He should be a big star right now, but the chance, I'm making this a question more not who should have in the past, but who right now. It's Tyler Turva, because his time may not have come yet, but he still has plenty of time to prove to the world and show the world what he has to offer. He's had some different tryouts and some sniffs at the big time just this past year at Impact Wrestling, and I hope that Tyler Turva gets many more chances with Impact Wrestling to really show them and the world what he has to offer, because I think Tyler Turva is a main event star just waiting to happen. Two other guys that come to mind are also guys that I've wrestled with over the years. One is Jake O'Reilly. Jake O'Reilly is currently wrestling a lot with Rock Solid Wrestling, a company I just mentioned when I was mentioning my time with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. And Jake O'Reilly has been to Japan. He has wrestled all over Canada, and he is just, he knows how to do his job, and he knows how to get heat. I one of my best feuds, literally money-making feuds. That's the thing. Like, some guys talk about feuds in terms of, oh, this feud that I had was really intense, or they had a lot of fun doing a feud. But that feud, the success of a feud is based on whether or not it draws money. And I was able to draw money with Jake O'Reilly when we started a feud many years ago in a company that I saw somebody mention in the comments. They said they miss me in the old CCW days. I should go through the comments and actually read that. Who said that? I want to give you a shout out right now. Joey, Joey A said, sup, Cody. Do you miss the old CCW days that you used to ring announce for CCW? Joey, let's shout out to Joey. There it is. Used to ring announce for CCW. Well, there you go, Joey. Do I miss CCW? Yes, I do. I'm going to tell a CCW story, because when I started this feud, Harold Durkee just has to tell everybody the Jake O'Reilly Diener feud in CCW was amazing. Yes, it was. Let me tell you about it. When we started our feud, we had about just over 100 people in the building. Fast forward a year later, and we packed an entire grandstand fair show full of people to see our blow off of our feud in a steel cage match. We drew money. We made more people come. During this feud, just to give you a little snippet of me to prove that Jake O'Reilly knew how to get heat, on one event that we had, we two different people in the audience phoned the police, and the cops showed up to the show because they told the police officer, Jake O'Reilly is assaulting Cody Diener and you need to come and help him. Two different fans phoned the police to show up at a wrestling show because they thought that what they saw was an actual true physical assault in a professional wrestling ring. Guys, this isn't like 40 years ago. This is like maybe 15 years ago that this happened. This is in the, the kayfabe era, where people know that, wrestling isn't, all on the up and up, like they maybe thought back in the 60s. They're like, they think they know what they're watching in this, this non-kayfabe era. We made people call the cops. That's how awesome this feud was. And Jake O'Reilly helped make that happen with the realism and what he does. He's awesome. He's so good, still good to this day at what he does. So he's somebody that I think, should have gotten farther and still could get far. He's getting old like me. He maybe doesn't have as many years left in the ring as a Tyler Turva, but he still has a lot to offer the business. He's got a great mind, and he's one of the best in-ring performers ever been in the ring with. That's Jake O'Reilly. Third guy is Tornado, another guy in Ontario that some people might not be familiar with, but this guy was ripping it up in the scene when I started 23 years ago. He's probably done more, dark matches or quote unquote WWE tryout matches than any other person maybe on the planet. He did so many back in the day that there was people in the WWE that thought he was a contracted, this is WWF before it was WWE. They thought he was a WWF wrestler. Guys on the roster just thought he was on the roster because he was there every single week doing dark matches. And he wasn't. He was not a contracted wrestler. He was just there doing the job, and he was better than over half the people that were on the roster. He should have been signed many, many moons ago. He understands this business on a level that most guys never will, and he's still killing it right now, both in the ring and running a wrestling company. I've named them 3. This is the 3rd time. I'll name them again. Rock Solid Wrestling. One of the brains behind Rock Solid Wrestling is Tornado. He knows this business inside and out, knows it kind of on a deeper level than a lot of people ever will. He should have been signed by the WWE decades ago. Still loves wrestling, will never stop. You'll have to kill him before he'll stop wrestling. And I very much love getting in the ring with Tornado, and maybe would also really enjoy having him on a future podcast. So I don't like to give away any future guests that I'm going to have on the show, but you might learn a little bit more about Tornado if you're a fan of the podcast, because he would be an awesome guest. Second question from Doug Timmermans over at patreon.com/Cody Diener. What was your earliest wrestling memory as a kid? My earliest wrestling memory is taking all the pillows off of the couch and emulating what I was seeing in the ring when I would wear the VHS tape out that was WrestleMania 2, Hogan and Bundy in a steel cage. I must have watched that match thousands of times until the tape just wouldn't play anymore. And my mom, she pressed rewind, and then finally it just snapped, and she'd press rewind and play so many times. That was my earliest memory, was watching WrestleMania 2 between Hulk Hogan and King Kong Bundy, and thinking that what Bobby the Brain Heenan was saying was actually going to happen, and that Hulkamania was going to die. That's one of my earliest wrestling memories. Last question from Doug was Dark Side of the Ring on Vice. Love it or hate it? Doug thinks that it was cool at first, but now he's just tired of the negativity. Doug, you took the words right out of my mouth. When Dark Side of the Ring started on Vice, I thought it was super cool. It was a very unique, different concept. And it was pretty neat to kind of see some of these never before heard stories, hear from some people that you didn't necessarily normally hear from when it came to these stories. But I've just got to the point for me watching it that every time I got to the end of an episode, I felt worse than I did when the episode started. And it didn't make me feel good. It didn't make me happy. I said earlier, one of the things that I get out of wrestling is it brings me joy, and it brings me joy seeing the joy that it brings to other people. And watching the Dark Side of the Ring was not bringing me joy. It was making me feel only negative things about the wrestling business. And I prefer not to view this business in a negative way. I try to stay positive. And when you're seeing and hearing some of the stories the way they're told on that show, it's very hard to focus on the positive, because oftentimes some of those episodes, there's nothing positive about them. I did start watching recently, though, the Tales of the Territories. That show is positive and super cool, because it's like a lot of the same stories from that same time frame and era, but it's just they got some people around a table chatting, telling some really cool positive stories and praising professional wrestling for what it is. And that's one of the best forms of entertainment in the world. So I haven't watched an episode of Dark Side of the Ring in a long time. If I watch something from Vice and some of the people involved in that, network, it's Tales of the Territories. It's a lot more positive. So Doug, thank you for your questions. I appreciate it very, very much. Let me start getting to some questions in the chat here. That's the end of the Patreon questions, people over at patreon.com. So if you want to make sure that in the future, I'm going to do some more of these. I have a lot of fun doing this. I'm already having fun. We're like almost 40 minutes into this, and I haven't even got to any questions that are in the chat. I've just got to our questions from our patrons. So if you want to make sure that you get your question answered next time I do one of these, head on over to patreon.com. There's lots of good content over there, and I will make sure that I get to your question for sure first thing next time I do an Ask Cody Anything bonus episode. All right, let me scroll through some of the questions here and see what we can do. And I'm not afraid to answer any question, by the way. I'm even gonna answer a crazy question like this. Ken over on Facebook says, "Can you tell us why you have morphed into a Zach Brown Road Weary Edge clone?" Um, you can do much better than that. I'm a big fan, dude. Thanks, Ken. Uh, you asked a similar question on Facebook. I saw it earlier today. You asked, why isn't someone as talented as you, who looks like a country singer, Zach Brown and Rotary Edge, in the WWE? You're quite entertaining. Would love to riff a promo with you. Thank you, Ken, for your question and your comment. Thank you for trying to cut a wrestling promo on me and insult me by telling me I look like a Zach Brown Road Weary Edge clone. Zach Brown is probably a millionaire, right? So that's cool. And he's a cool dude. He's a very talented guy. And even also talented is Edge, fellow Canadian. I've been told, Ken, that since I started wrestling that I look like Edge. I was told a couple years into my career from one of Edge's best friends, childhood friends in Sin Bodhi, that I look like Edge. Cool, funny story. I was with Sin Bodhi backstage at a WWE event. I was doing some extra work and trying to get a contract years ago, and Sin brought me up to Edge, the road weary Edge that you're talking about in this comment slash question you've put here in the chat. And he said, "Edge, who's this look like?" And he's like, "I don't know." And he says, "No, take a good look at him. Who's this guy look like?" And Edge was like, "I don't know. I'm out of guesses. I can't even guess. Just tell me." And he goes, "It's you. Isn't this just like looking in a mirror?" And Sin had me and Edge stand side by side, look in a mirror and look at ourselves. I see the resemblance. And Edge was known early in his career as a heartthrob. So I'm going to take what you're trying to throw shade at me there, Ken, as a huge compliment and say, you just think I look like a heartthrob. I'm a country music singing, pro wrestling heartthrob. So thank you, man. I appreciate your compliment, Ken. I appreciate it very much. Let's go through some other quickly comments. Josh Bunton. I see, Josh, you comment a lot on my episodes and always have something nice to say. One of the things that Josh has said here is that he thinks that my kids are hilarious and they make the commercials great. Thank you, Josh. I appreciate that very much. Jamie wants to know, what was your greatest match in your career? Jamie over on Facebook. It's too hard, man. I get asked this question all the time. What's the greatest match I've ever had? My greatest match that I've ever had is my next match. And I know that sounds like a throwaway cop out, but it is. I want my next match to be my best match. There's a lot of matches that kind of come to mind. But I can't say that they're my greatest match, because a match, here's my take on what it means to have a great match. You accomplish the task at hand. If you accomplish the task at hand, then you've had a great match. Now, not every match has the same task. Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, WrestleMania 25, go out, main event, steal the show. Their task isn't the same as the opening match of that card. I don't even know what the opening match of that card was, but the task at hand, the emotions, the feelings that you're trying to get from the audience are different. And what you're trying to get the audience to feel in the main event is different than what you're trying to make them feel in the opening match, because in the opening match, you're just trying to set the stage. You're setting the table for the rest of the show. It's a very, 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 very important match on on any wrestling card, because you're setting the table for the rest of the guys and girls that are going to follow you. So your task is different. So does it make the main event any greater than the opening match or one of the undercard matches? No, they both had different tasks at hand. And if they both accomplished their task, then it was great. One main event match that just comes to mind, it's not my greatest match, but it was one of my most meaningful matches, is the first time I wrestled for an hour. I had a 60-minute match with my trainer, Danger Boy Derek Wild, and it was a very meaningful and great match for me, not just because we wrestled for an hour, but we were tasked with wrestling for an hour in the main event of a Neo Spirit wrestling show, which is a hard crowd to kind of please after because they've seen some really great wrestling, Neo Spirit Pro Wrestling. Again, wrestling now. I'm going to be wrestling on a Neo Spirit show this weekend. Go neopro.ca. You can learn all about Neo Spirit and the resurgence that they've had. Amazing wrestling company here in Ontario, Canada, and in Niagara Falls. Shout out to the Neo crew. But wrestling in a main event on a Neo show was difficult because there were so many amazing matches that you had to follow. But also, we were both baby faces, and it wasn't announced that it was going to be an Iron Man match. So the crowd did not know that they were about to watch a match for an hour. They're going to watch two baby faces wrestle to an almost 60-minute time limit draw where the finish is going to happen within the final seconds of the match. That is not an easy task to accomplish, and we accomplished the task. So it was very meaningful for me, and I cried at the end of the match. It's one of the only times I've ever broken down and cried in the middle of the ring, and I don't know if it was because I was so proud that I was able to accomplish this task with my trainer in Danger Boy Derek Wild, or if it was because I was so physically exhausted that I couldn't even control myself. But yeah, that one just sticks out for me for a number of reasons, that being one of them. And another match of mine that we accomplished the task at hand was a pay-per-view match that I had back in 2009 with ODB. The task at hand was, let's go out there and have a really entertaining yet competitive match after I've done a whole buildup for a month of wrestling knockouts on the TNA wrestling show where I wasn't allowed to touch any of them. That's a caveat that a lot of people don't realize. If you actually go back and watch the buildup to my pay-per-view match with ODB, I was supposed to act like I didn't know how to wrestle. That was the gimmick. I was just a fan, so I had to pretend that I didn't know how to wrestle. Then, after they've booked me to wrestle some knockouts leading up to the pay-per-view, I get told by management that something had happened in the news with some violence against women, and they decided they were not going to allow any physical violence between males and females on their show. Specifically, male on female violence. Females were allowed to beat up males, but males weren't allowed to physically do anything to females. So I said, okay, does that mean we're changing our matches? And they said, no, we are not. We're still going to go ahead with all these matches. Cody, you're going to have to wrestle these females and make them believe that you don't know how to wrestle, but also you can't touch them. Huh. I'm supposed to I'm supposed to do this and build up to a pay-per-view match where I'm going to try to entertain these people and bring them on this ride. I'm very proud of that match that I was able to have with ODB. Jess is an amazing performer. She now has ODB meet and greet food truck. She's awesome. She's just recently married, happily married. Congratulations to ODB. And we had a kick-ass match. We stole the show, man. You go back and watch that pay-per-view. We had, we did not have a 5-star wrestling classic, but the match was not supposed to be a 5-star mat wrestling classic. That was not the task at hand. But you go back and you watch that match, that crowd, we had them in the palm of our hands the entire time. You can actually hear Taz on commentary, I think, at one point. He's like, he actually put over, like, what a match. He couldn't believe what we were doing, and the fact that we were getting this match and getting the audience to react the way that we were. He even just jumped out of character and was like, this is awesome. I don't remember his exact words, but he was blown away because he was watching. Okay. He knew what we were doing and what we're trying to accomplish and what the task was at hand. And we accomplished that. So it's not my best wrestling match, but it's a very proud moment for me where I was able to prove people wrong by showing them, hey, yes, what you just consider comedy wrestling might just be this throwaway thing and it's just going to be this silly match. But no, we're going to have this place rocking and have these people getting out of their chairs and going crazy for this. And we were able to do that. So that one is another one that comes to mind. And there's a whole bunch of stuff that I'm proud of in my recent years, a whole bunch of Violent by Design matches. One in particular that I want to mention there, Jamie Deslip over on Facebook, is a that's even more meaningful now because of one of the participants, and that was myself and Eric Young versus the Briscoe brothers. We got to wrestle Jay and Mark on pay-per-view for Impact, and the Mick Foley talks about the post-match glow that performers have after they're done and have a really good match, this adrenaline rush and this glow that wrestlers have after just knowing that they killed it in the ring. I had that glow for like 24 hours after that match, and so many of the wrestlers came up to me and Eric Young and the Briscoes, patting us on the back, telling us how awesome the match was, and it just felt so good to have that acknowledgement from both my peers, but then just knowing that I was able to go out with all three of those guys, Eric Young, Mark Briscoe, Jay Briscoe, and just kill it on pay-per-view. Man, I was super proud of that match. And if you haven't seen it, go back and watch it. I'm pretty sure the full match is on YouTube. That's the Briscoes versus Violent by Design. Go back and watch it. Thanks for your question. Ryan Harvey Stuckless asks, who from WWE or AEW would you want to face? There's a lot of people, but I'm going to use this as an opportunity to pump this week's guest. I want to say Shawn Spears. Shawn Spears, I have wrestled him in the past. I wrestled him before he wrestled for AEW, but I haven't wrestled him since he's been in AEW, and I want to get in the ring with him again. He's one of my favorite wrestlers to be in the ring with of all time in my career. If I had to wrestle just one guy every night for the rest of my life, I think I would have to say that person is Shawn Spears. He is the most criminally underrated professional wrestler in the world today. He's also an awesome dude. He's super smart, not just when it comes to wrestling business, when it comes to life. And that's why he's going to be my next guest. So coming this Thursday, you can listen to my episode with Shawn Spears. And then part 2 will be coming at you next week. You can listen to the whole thing right now, early and ad free over at patreon.com/Cody Diener. Colin Hunter has a question that he asked 40 minutes ago, and I'm just getting to now because I'm super behind in my comments. Colin, I don't know if you are still watching this right now, but I want to get to your question. It is an awesome one, and that is, what's a piece of advice that you would give to your 20-year-old self? Before I answer your question, let's all just give Colin our praises right now in the chat and tell Colin how awesome he was and how wonderful the last 2 episodes were with Kayfabe News's Colin Hunter. Yes, that's the Colin Hunter that's asking this question. The Colin Hunter, the guy that I've talked to for the last couple of weeks. What's just a wonderful guest. I loved the conversation. We probably talked more wrestling, me and Colin, than I have with any of my other guests, and I loved it very, very much. What's a piece of advice that you'd give to my 20-year-old self? I think what I would tell myself then is a piece of advice that I've given to young people now, and that is, don't take yourself too seriously, but take the wrestling business very seriously. I've mixed up on both of those things in my career, early in my career. So number 1, don't take yourself too seriously. There was times when I took myself too seriously. I refused or said no to something because I'm like, I can't do that because I took myself too seriously. And then on the flip side of that, I've maybe said yes to some things and was willing to do things because I didn't want to take myself too seriously. But what happened is the result was it kind of was insulting to the wrestling business because I wasn't taking the business of wrestling too seriously, or I wasn't taking the business seriously in the sense that I wasn't looking at it in the right context, in the sense that this is a business and it's about making money. And sometimes when you're struggling um, through your journey of wrestling, you kind of lose sight of that. And I've lost sight of that a couple times in my career, that, hey, you know what? This is a business. It's about making money. Don't take things personal. And remember, we're here to make money because it's a business. So when you're trying to put smiles on people's faces, just remember we're putting smiles on their faces, but also it's a business transaction at the same time. So that's a piece of advice I'd give to myself when I was 20, because I've lost sight of that at various times in my career when I was younger. Um let's go through some of these things. Just want to give a shout out here, put them up on the screen. Good Cop, Bad Cop Wrestling Podcast. They've had nothing but really nice things to say. I appreciate your comments each and every week and supporting the podcast, sharing it on your socials. And you just said breaking news. That's awesome. That was, again, when did you put this comment? 7:13. So, geez, this is 40 minutes ago, 45 minutes ago, when I was talking about Rest When Dead. Breaking news. Let's mention it again. I am the vice president of Rest When Dead Clothing. I'm a VP of a clothing line, the same clothing line that started out as a sponsor for this podcast just a little bit over a month ago. I'm now a vice president and loving it, not just because they're an awesome company, not just because they have really cool merchandise like this official Cody Diener Rest When Dead hat, or this Cody Diener signature t-shirt just released, or this best-selling Rest When Dead Reaper shirt. Not just because their merch is awesome, but they also give back. They give back to the fitness community that they started in, and they're also going to be giving back to the wrestling community that we're in with now. So stay tuned for some really cool stuff coming down the pipe from Rest When Dead in the wrestling community. It's going to be sweet. So thank you, Good Cop, Bad Cop Wrestling Podcast, for that. Harold Durkee, on that note, he's got a black Diener shirt and a blue Father Time shirt. That blue Father Time one, Harold, is one of my favorite Rest When Dead pieces of merchandise. Go over to restwhendead.ca and check out the blue Father Time one. It's pretty sweet. Dean Scott, also a big thank you. Dean Scott, love the shirt. I bought a couple. Love it. All right. Aaron York, the president of Rest When Dead, is either watching this now or is going to watch it. And I will say, on the behalf of him and everybody at Rest When Dead, to you, Dean Scott, thank you for buying some Rest When Dead merchandise. We appreciate you. Chris Lortson says, I'm getting ready to start my own podcast soon. I hope to have as much success as you. Thanks, Chris. I mean, I'm not super successful in terms of my podcast. Like, I don't have millions of followers. I'm not having millions of downloads every week listening to Wrestling is Life is Wrestling podcast. I don't have a huge YouTube subscribership right now. I talked about this earlier in the show, trying to up those numbers. I don't have a huge following. I'm not going to sit here and say, yeah, I hope you're really successful like me, Chris, because I'm not super successful, but I'm successful in that I'm creating what I want to create the way I want to create it, and I'm staying true to myself, I guess is what I want to say, Chris, is that I decided I was going to start a wrestling podcast that was going to focus on the positive, not throw dirt, not throw shade, not try to just get snippets so that the dirt sheets would pick it up and us talking trash about the latest gossip that's going on in the wrestling business. Some people do that. That's fine. If that's what you want to do, if that's your business model for your podcast, great. All the power to you. But that's not what I want to do, and that's not what I'm going to do. So the fact that I have people that, even though the listenership and the viewership might not be huge right now, the following I do have is a very dedicated following, and I appreciate each and every one of you for following along and listening every week. I also know that my podcast is a slow burn, and that it might take it might take years before this podcast catches on and I start to have millions of downloads, but I think there's a chance that in the future that's going to happen, that more people are going to learn about the show and the great guests that I have and the insightful things that my guests have to say and the way we want to really talk about professional wrestling in a positive way. It's already catching on. It's a top downloaded one of the top download podcasts in Canada. We've topped charts both in Canada and the United States. We keep moving up in the charts, and I'm just going to keep sticking to my guns and keep doing what I do. So thank you, Chris, and good luck with your new podcast adventure as well. Dean Scott, we just gave a shout out to you. He said, "Didn't you meet someone at library in New York last summer?" No, it wasn't New York, but you were right. It was in a library, but it was not New York. It was in Florida. It was in Panama City Beach, Florida, and I got to meet Bob Backlund. If you follow me on social media, you can go back into my social media, go to my Facebook or go to my Instagram and go back and scroll through my Instagram until you see a picture of me smiling with Bob Backlund and then read the caption. I gave the full story there on my social media. We're already at an hour, so I don't have time to tell that entire story, but maybe it's a story that I can tell later in a future episode. Todd Brantley said thoughts and memories on the late great Brody Lee. Ooh, Todd, thank you for that question. I'm going to say this. I felt honored to have shared the ring with Brody. Even more honored to have called him a friend. My lasting memory of my friend Brody Lee will always be after we both wrestled together on a little bar event in St. Thomas, Ontario for CCW. I've mentioned CCW a couple times so far in this episode, but I wrestled him on this small show in a bar, and he stayed at my house after, before he had to get back on the road and go to his next event for that weekend. I invited him into my home, and we sat on my porch and shared a beer. And for 2-3 hours, we cracked open a couple more beers and we just talked about life. We were both really at the same point in our careers at that point. We really wanted to get the ever elusive contract and wrestle on TV. But this is also, we talked about Brody's desire to start a family, to get married, have a family, and that was something that really stood out to me about our conversation because, yeah, we were talking about our goals in wrestling, but we were also talking about our goals in life. And Brody was a man that even before he was married and had a family, he had a deep desire in his heart to start a family and to be a father. And he became a wonderful father. I think his lasting legacy is probably going to be as a dad, and I th- I think that's every man's desire. Any true man that is a father, I should say, any true man that is a dad and has kids wants their lasting legacy to be that they were just a good dad. And Brody Lee was an amazing father. I saw that firsthand, and I would say that was a really amazing thing to see the world when they mourned Brody Lee's death. They also celebrated him as a father because he was a very, very good one. And that's what stuck out to me about Brody, even way back when we just sat on a porch as young 20-year-olds and we're talking about our futures and our desires in our life. He wanted to be a dad and he accomplished that goal big time. He became a really awesome dad. It's just a few of my thoughts and memories on the late great Brody Lee. Thank you for that question, Todd. I appreciate it. All right. Let me see if I can catch up with some of these. I'm gonna rapid fire a couple of these a little bit quick. Mark Nesbitt, did you ever meet Iron Mike Sharp? No. Mike Ford, was Tyson Dukes not in the same boat as Tornado, where people thought he was contracted? Yes, he was. Both Tornado and Tyson Dukes did more dark matches than anybody that I know of in a span of just a few years. And both of those guys, people thought that they were contracted to the WWE because they were there every week, busting their butts, trying to get that like every elusive contract. They were awesome. Tyson Dukes is another guy that should have made it farther in wrestling. He should still be on TV now. And he was an amazing, amazing, amazing performer, and he was in the same boat as Tornado. Yes, Mike. Tyson Dukes was one of those guys. Sam Sino, hey man. Hey Sam. Hey man. Joey, what Spears doing these days? You can learn all about that this week on Wrestling is Life is Wrestling, because he is my next guest on the show. So watch that and listen to it wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll be talking to Spears. Oh, here's the real answer to your question, Joey. What's Spears doing nowadays? Here's the answer to your question. Defending the Neo Grand Independent Championship title on Saturday in Niagara Falls. That's what he's doing in the immediate future. Not only is he going to be a guest this Thursday for part one of our conversation, but he's going to be at the Neo Pro Wrestling show defending his championship in Niagara Falls, coming back to his hometown and defending the Neo Grand Independent Championship this Saturday. Pretty cool. I was just talking about defending wrestling for the Neo Grand Independent Championship against Danger Boy Derek Wild many moons ago, going for an entire hour. Well, you're going to see another great main event with Shawn Spears for Neo this Saturday. You should go. Everybody should. Todd agrees. Todd Shaw. How's it going, Todd? Neo Pro Wrestling. Thumbs up from Todd. Thanks, Todd. Let's get to some other questions. Here's one from Gary's Movie Crypt, aka the Horror King, over on YouTube. He said, Cody, are the design coming to an end soon, or will it grow again? All I can say to that, Gary, is stay tuned. There's big things coming in Impact Wrestling. We are going to be TNA Wrestling once again come January. There's big things on the horizon, and I've got big plans for myself in the soon to be again TNA. Does that involve the design coming to an end? Does that involve the design growing? Stay tuned, Gary. I appreciate you watching TNA so far. Watch TNA in the new year, and you can find out. Oh, Colin said he's still watching. Glad you're still watching, Colin. I'm getting caught up here. Harold Durkee, Colin, speaking to you. Harold Durkee says, I want to see the ref didn't see it. So do I. Everybody else does too, especially anybody that listened to my interview with Colin. They want to see the ref didn't see it. I want to see it. You want to see it. We all want to see it. How do we see it? How do we support it? Go to therefmovie.com. That's therefmovie.com. Colin, what is it? I think it's therefmovie.com. Colin, if you're still here, maybe you can write that into the comments, therefmovie.com, and people can go and support it on Kickstarter and get this thing going. It's gonna be awesome. I've talked to Colin and Sarah and the people making the film a bunch of times, been involved in a variety of ways. I'm looking forward to seeing it myself. That's therefmovie.com. Oh, no, 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 no. Scrolling through the comments here. I see J Money 22 said, Connor Gunk here. Hi. Is this Connor Gunkel? Is J Money 22? Is this Connor himself, or is it somebody that's related to Connor? I see that your profile picture is of me and Connor at a Greektown wrestling show. I'm not sure who this is, J Money 22, but if you are a friend of Connor's or you are Connor yourself, that just happened to have a different profile name, then you're a friend of mine. I want to I'm glad that you mentioned Connor there, J Money 22, because it gives me a chance to talk about my latest fundraiser, which is over at givesendgo.com slash giver for Connor. I'm going to put that into the comments right now. Go to givesendgo.com slash giver for Connor. You go to that link. Oh, and you can see a video that I've uploaded, and you can learn all about Connor and the fundraiser that we're doing for my buddy. He has an amazing story. He's an amazing guy, and I'm really happy that I'm able to help the family out with my latest Giver for Charity fundraiser, which is for Connor and his family. So, hi, J Money 22. I'm glad that you logged on here, and I appreciate it very much. Um, Let me go through and see. Get to a couple here before we log off. We're winding down here. I was hoping to go for about an hour. We're already we're over an hour now, so I'm gonna get to just a couple more. I'm just seeing some people having some kind things to say um, in the chat. One of those is John Siegfried said, if there were a four horsemen of Ontario indie wrestling from back in the day, I would say it's you, Spears, Danger Boy, and Tyson's. That would be myself, Sean Spears, Danger Boy, Derek Wild, and Tyson Dukes. Thank you, John. I appreciate that very much. That is some good company that you're putting me with. Some amazing wrestlers that I've shared the ring with, all of them. They are awesome. Let's hit this one last question here. Tubesy says, this is over on YouTube. Tubesy said, do you have a favorite place to perform, or is there a surprising crowd that shocks you when performing? I don't have a favorite place that I perform, honestly, but the first place that came to mind when I read that question is a place that I've probably performed in, a town that I performed in, probably more than any other town in the world, and that is Oshawa, Ontario. I wrestle there now for a wrestling company called Pro Wrestling Eclipse. I am known as the King of the Schwa, and I have been wrestling in Oshawa, Ontario for, oh my goodness, almost 2 decades. It's a wrestling town that's rich in wrestling history, and they kind of like me and my fan base. I said it earlier, I don't have a fan base of millions and millions of people, but the fan base that I do have is super dedicated and loyal to me. The fans in Oshawa, Ontario are the same. There's not always a huge, enormous crowd at an event in Oshawa, Ontario, but it's a very loyal, dedicated fan base. And there's people that in Oshawa that have seen me wrestle for 2 decades, and they still come see me wrestle. They still buy my merch. They still support me, and I am their king, known as the King of the Schwa. So, um, I guess it's a place where the crowd surprises me and shocks me when I'm performing, because every single time I go, I see familiar faces that I'm like, "Man, how do these people continue to come here every month, year after year, supporting, this small little independent promotion?" Well, it's because they love it as much as I do. They love wrestling, and they love independent wrestling, and they love to see the young and the hungry guys that are just striving to make it in this business, and that's what they get each and every time they come to a wrestling show in Oshawa, Ontario. So, quick shout out there to the Schwa. Proud to be the king of the Schwa. It surprises me every time, but I love it. So that's going to do it, I think. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. There were some that I just don't have time to get to because I'm already 15 minutes longer than I wanted to. So if you didn't get your question answered for this go around, well, this isn't going to be the only time I do this. I had fun today doing this special edition of Ask Cody Anything, special bonus episode of Wrestling is Life is Wrestling. I'm going to take this episode and I'm going to upload it onto Apple, Spotify, and as a bonus episode, it's going to be heard from all my listeners all around the world. So even though there's people that are not watching it live right now or didn't see it live, people are going to hear your question and hear my answer to it as a bonus episode. And I think I'm going to do this again. It was successful in the sense that I had a lot of people logging on here and asking questions. Maybe some people were coming in and out as we were doing this, but I had a lot of fun and appreciate you guys coming on here and doing this with me, and asking some questions. Oh, now, of course, I said we don't have any more questions, and now I've got all these questions that I'm just seeing now pop up onto the chat here. Let me get to Sarah. I can't end now because I got to get to Sarah's question because Sarah's awesome. Sarah is over on Facebook, is watching on Facebook. She is the person that was behind the video interview of me and Colin that you just listened to the last couple of weeks. Sarah is involved in the refmovie.com. The ref didn't see it. And Sarah's awesome. Hi, Sarah. I'm glad you were watching. And Sarah said, "What has surprised you about podcasting?" Oh, man. A lot of things have surprised me. One is the amount of work that is involved in doing a podcast. I knew that there was going to be a lot of work, especially because when I started it, I decided I was going to do everything myself because I'm crazy. And I'm like, no, I'm not just going to do it myself. I'm going to write the theme song and perform the theme song. And I'm going to edit each and every episode myself. I'm going to set up all the interviews myself. I'm going to make sure that the sound quality is good. I'm going to do all the commercials myself. I'm going to splice it all together. I'm going to figure out how to get it to the world through podcasting streaming services. I'm going to do it all myself. Even though I decided to do that and I knew it was going to be a lot of work, it still surprises me how many hours I sit here in my studio and do editing and make this thing happen. That has surprised me. I also was hoping that I was going to enjoy it because I only like to do the things that I like to do. I'm a creative person. I like creating things, and it has surprised me how much I have enjoyed the process. Not just the interviews. I love talking to people and learning from the people that I'm talking to, but just the process of what I was just talking about, putting the thing together, creating an episode, being happy with how that episode sounds and looks when I'm done, creating something from nothing and putting it out into the world is so satisfying. And I wasn't sure that it was going to be so satisfying, and it is. The last thing that has surprised me is the fact that because I started this podcast, I've met some amazing people, and some of those amazing people are at Rest When Dead Clothing. And I can say I'm pretty damn surprised that I am now the vice president of a clothing line. And a lot of that's attributed to the fact that I started a podcast and I've met Aaron York and the fine people at Rest When Dead. I did not think when I started this podcast just a few months ago that I would be adding a VP of a clothing company to my resume. I can now. So that has surprised me, Sarah. So thank you for your question. I'm looking forward to seeing the ref didn't see it. People can go to therefmovie.com. Good cop, bad cop wants to say, appreciate this, Cody. It was a great listen. Thank you. Harold Durkee, again, lots of you. I got to your question, said it was a good solid hour. Thank you. I appreciate you guys. Todd says that I'm an awesome role model. Glad to know you. I'm glad to know you too, Todd. Thank you. And you say that your kids still love me. I appreciate that, Todd. That's awesome. Noah, yes, you are the king of Oshawa, Ontario, the king of the Schwa. Yes, I am. Thank you guys for your questions. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you guys. And I'm going to do this again. Like I said, if I didn't get to your question tonight, I will get to it in a future episode. Next time I do Ask Cody Anything. This is the first time that I've done it, but it won't be the last. So for those of you that are watching this right now that have never listened to an episode of my podcast, please do go to Wrestling is Life is Wrestling, either on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or any podcasting stream, wherever you get your podcasts, you can go listen to all the episodes right now. I've had some amazing guests. Episode 1 and 2 was with Josh Alexander. Episodes 3 and 4 were with Rosemary, Courtney Rush. I have a trilogy of episodes with the story of my good friend, Crazy Steve. It's a fascinating story and a journey of what that man has been through. It's unbelievable. Go back and listen to this. I've talked to Joe Hendry. I have talked to David Sahadi, the brains and the mind behind the WWE Attitude Era and the creative process that's involved in that. Some amazing stories. That's just a snippet of some of the guys that I and girls that I have talked to. And I'm going to be talking to more, including this week. Sean Spears. He was mentioned in this episode, this bonus episode, and you can listen to him. And part 1 of our conversation this week you can watch it on YouTube, listen to it. Please rate, review, and subscribe. It very much helps me over on Apple and Spotify. So if you would listen to the podcast over on either of those platforms, please, I would appreciate it if you would take the time to write a review. Give me a 5-star rating. That just helps more people that listen to shows like this. It's going to pop up in their feed. It'll help the algorithm, just like the algorithms on social media, and it'll just more people will learn about Wrestling is Life is Wrestling if you do that for me. So if you can't, go over to patreon.com/Cody Diener, where you can get all the episodes from the past. You get them early and ad-free every week. You get bonus stories with every single guest, stuff that I don't put online. It's only over at patreon.com/Cody Diener. You can go over there and check those out. But if you can't afford to support this podcast through my Patreon, then you can just give me a review and a 5-star review, and I would appreciate it very, very much. So thank you guys for listening. You guys are amazing. I'm going to do this again, and I'm going to appreciate doing it again. I'm going to appreciate you guys doing it. So thank you guys for joining me for this special bonus episode of Wrestling is Life is Wrestling. I'll see you next time we do one of these Ask Cody Anythings. And until then, I will see you next week. Well, this week, actually, and next week, and the week after that, and the week after that. If you are a dedicated listener, like I said, I got a very loyal, dedicated fan base. You guys will be coming back each and every week. And when you do, what will you learn? You will always learn that wrestling is life, is wrestling. Thank you so much, guys.